right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. This is a question and answer based podcast where you can send me in questions and I will listen to them, consider them, and likely put them up on a future episode as I am doing today. So if you would like your question answered on a future podcast, you can go over to fearcastpodcast.com and you can submit a question, click on the submit a question link, send me your question. You could also send an audio question in, press on the speech pipe button, which is how Jim got his question into me today. So I am going to be playing his question because audio questions, as y'all know, go to the tippity top of the list. I also have another one coming, and I forget who it's from, but they sent it to me over at Instagram. So you can send it to me over at Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over yonder, and you can find me there. So send me a DM, press on the little microphone button, record your voice. You get the idea. So I think so. This question is a really good question today, and I get this question and I get this concern from people a lot. A lot of people want to know the answer to this. A lot of people struggle with it. And I'm probably going to piss some people off today about this answer. And I know I am. I just know I am. And if you are somebody out there that is upset by this answer and this question, I get it. I get it. It's not fun. It's not a good answer for some people or a good answer according to anxiety, but it's the answer that's to be given. So it's a discussion that needs to happen. Maybe I'm just making it a little too, maybe I'm building it up way too stinking much. I probably am, but it's here we are. So it's the question of, is my obsession real or is it not? Who out there has asked that question? Maybe you have. I know Jim has, but maybe you have as well. And it got me, the more I started thinking, I had this weird experience. The more I started thinking about this question today, the more I started questioning myself. And I'm like, am I giving the wrong answer to this or explaining it incorrectly? Now, granted, when I have explained this in the past, I have gotten emails and very upset people at the answer that I have, so much so that I asked a bunch of other therapist friends that I have and said, hey, how do y'all answer this question? And for the most part, people agree with me on how I react to it, how I respond to it. But either way, I think I'm building it up way too much. Why don't I get off to Jim's question and I'll let y'all listen to it. We'll play it here, and then we can talk about what my answer is. Shall we? Here we go.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for the podcast that you do. I was diagnosed with harm OCD and homosexual obsessive compulsive disorder 5 years ago. I was told you're not gay or bisexual or you're not harmful. This is just OCD. I think what kind of scares me is there's been quite a few sort of therapists online where I've come across like feedback of saying, yeah, you can have HOCD and realise you're gay or bi, or harm obsessions and realise you're harmful, which has kind of really, really triggered me for a long time. And it's actually put me out of work due to the severity of my issues. I'm just kind of hoping you've got some insight into this, like, with the diagnosis of HOCD, meaning I'm not gay or bisexual, or harm, meaning I'm not harmful. It'd be great to get your feedback. Thank you. Bye.
All right, Jim, thank you so much for that question and sending that in. Again, I know that so many people have this question, and I'm going to try to explain it in the best way that I can, because it's a bit of a nuance. It's a bit of a nuanced answer. I know that there's going to be no way that I can get out of explaining this one and doing this whole episode without making some people upset in one way or the other. Because we all know I don't want to give reassurances, right? I don't want to give inappropriate, inaccurate, and unhealthy reassurances. But I also don't want to lie to y'all. Right? So I feel like it's a hard thing for me to do, and yet here I am. And I set myself up for this. I was like, I'm going to go piss some people off today. So that's how we do it. All right, but I'm going to try to be as nuanced as I can and kind of explain why it is that I'm explaining it the way that I'm explaining it, and then we can see where we go, shall we? Okay. All right, so first, I'm going to start with something triggering, but I want y'all to hold off. I want y'all to get through this episode, right? As we know with OCD and anxiety disorders, right, we're learning to ride the wave, not to feel certain or to feel comfortable or to feel right all the time, but instead to know that sometimes we're going to feel triggered, we're going to feel anxious, we're going to hear something and see something that we might not like. And as we live life, we need to know that we can see it and hear it and feel it and experience it, and that we can ride through that. And that's what we're trying to do today. So, Jim, to your question, I know you're saying, you're concerned like, hey, you've been hearing a bunch of different therapists say one thing and a bunch of therapists saying another thing. And you know what? Unfortunately, therapists are just simply not going to agree. I've had some therapists that I've spoken to that have said, we can eliminate OCD. And then people go, no, you can't because it's a chronic mental health disorder. They said, no, I assure you, you can do X, Y, or Z or follow my very specific training and treatment method, and you can eliminate OCD. And some people, myself included, go, no, we can build a new and better and more healthy relationship to our thoughts. But we ain't getting rid of our brain, right? I mean, the way to get rid of thoughts and feelings is, drugs and alcohol. That is one way to get rid of thoughts and feelings. And it works for a time, but, for those who struggle with that and for those who are reasonable people, we all know it's an unsustainable method. So obviously it's not going to work. All right, so here's my triggering answer to this. So Jim and everybody else out there. So yes, you can have harm OCD and still harm someone. Yes, you can have SOOCD, HOCD, I think you referred to it as, and still be gay or bisexual. Now, again, ride through with me on this, because I'm going to get to explaining why I'm going to give you that answer, okay? Now, maybe some listeners have heard me explain this, but maybe there's some new listeners who are here to get angry at me. So I said those things, and now let's just take a little bit of a step back, all right? So let's take a step back into what OCD is, right? OCD is a fixation on a thought or an experience that is related to a subject of great importance, right? So I'm going to say it again, OCD is a fixation on a thought or an experience related to a subject of great importance, right? So a little bit of distance I created there, right? So I talk a lot on this podcast about what the feared story is. You've heard me say 1,000 times, I don't think OCD is really a thought problem. It is a feeling problem. It is not about the content of the obsession. It is about the feeling that you get in the middle of it, or a feeling that you get in response to that. Now, there will be people who will disagree with me on that, and that's fine. Y'all can be wrong, but that is what I think it is. And again, for the most part, there may be some caveats, and someone's going to go, but I'm different. Great, let's talk about how it's different, and then we'll show you how it's exactly the same. But we talk a lot about the feared story because that's what's underneath it. That's what's fueling, or that's what's, again, going back, that's what's underneath that story, right? We think it's about your sexuality, but it's usually about something else. You think it's about your relationship. You think it's about your relationship with God. You think it's about cleanliness. It's about something else. It's something else underneath that, right? OCD wants you to think it's about this content thing, but really it's about this whole other thing. And that's what we talk about. That's what we're here to really work on, and to actually disengage from the content of it, right? So that's why it's so important to know, what is it that we're getting at? Why is that fear so terrifying, right? So, for example, for Jim, what would it mean for you if you were to discover that you were actually violent or could be violent, etc.? What would it mean for you if you discovered that you are gay or bisexual or could be, right? That's what we're getting at here, right? So maybe it means that, all right, underneath that, it means that, well, you wouldn't be yourself, right? You would feel uncomfortable to imagine yourself. It would just be uncomfortable to imagine yourself being or doing something that's not aligned with who you are. Maybe that's it, right? Or that feeling that you're just not it's just wrong, or it's bad, or it's not what you're about. And that feeling of, that's yucky and that's icky and I don't want to feel that or be that. And I got to get rid of that feeling, right? But that's the purpose of what exposure and response prevention is. It is to practice sitting with the subject, the thought, the feeling, being in proximity to or in relationship with the thing that causes a sense of anxiety and uncertainty and fear and whatever other nasty, funky word that you want to put in there. And to learn that you can actually sit with and have that feeling without compulsion, without solving it, without getting to the bottom of it, right? So that's why we want to talk about what the feared story is, right? But oftentimes what we're talking about here is, as well is, and people get hung up on this, it's the fear of the possibility, right? Look, there's a lot of stuff that is possible in this life, a lot of stuff that we are capable of, a lot of stuff that we are have the option to do. There's a comedian out there who jokes. I think they would call themselves. I don't know if this might not be the right word, or I don't think this is what they call themselves, but they might call themselves disabled. I don't know if they call themselves handicapped. They might just say disabled. Either way, but they say like, you are one accident away from joining this very exclusive group. Right? It's like one of those groups that you could join if something weird happens, right? So there's a lot of stuff that could happen, but it doesn't mean that it will happen, right? So I want to acknowledge that like we have the capacity for a lot of those things, including harm, including cheating, including stealing, including passing or getting a disease, including committing blasphemy. Fill in the blank with the thing that you're worried about. It's possible. It does not mean that it's probable or likely or will happen. But there's a lot of things that could happen. You've heard me talk about it a bajillion times. I could get into a car accident today, right? Something awful might happen to my kids today. It could happen, and we know it academically. I know in the land of earthquakes, the big one might happen during this podcast, and you're going to be able to see all the shaky shakes. And that's possible, right? But I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not worried about it even a little bit, right? Now, I was writing this and considering this and going like, all right, I don't know what to do with the existential fears. I don't know about like, all right, maybe we're in the Matrix, or maybe, it's solipsism, or like I'm the only person in existence and all are just a figment of my imagination or something like that. I don't know if that's possible, but again, we got to be open to maybe it is. But like you've heard me explain this before, we might live in the Matrix. We might. All right. Now, if we do, the fear for some people with that, again, it's the fear underneath it, right? The compulsion for the Matrix would be, I get to figure out if this is indeed reality. So they're going to read a lot of philosophy, and they're going to do a lot of like reality testing and checking and stuff like that. But what's underneath that is, for some people, and the folks I've worked with on this, like the fear underneath that is like, well, what if nothing matters and none of my decisions matter? Well, I could just kill someone. Right? Because if there are no rules, and if you're not real, what stops me from killing you, right? Or fill in the blank with whatever the terrible thing is, right? And I go, all right, maybe, but what stops me to a certain degree is, I still have Matrix bills to pay, and I still have Matrix kids to raise. And I don't want to go to Matrix jail, because maybe I am in the Matrix, but Matrix, free life is probably better than Matrix jail. So I'm going to continue to not go to Matrix jail. So it's my preference, but y'all do you. Okay. So another thing to consider with this, and we talk about this in treatment a lot, is we can't predict the future. And any attempts to do so is just going to leave us feeling exhausted and unsatisfied. We're here to do hard things. This is something I heard from John Hirschfield. I love this. I'm here to ask you to do hard things, but I'm not here to ask you to do impossible things, right? We want to do difficult things. We want to face difficulty. We want to challenge ourselves and grow. But we don't need to do impossible things like predict the future. Good luck. Good luck. We usually suck at that. So I also wanted to present, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, and I apologize, but again, I'm trying to talk about a different way to think about this fear, Jim. Okay, the different way to think about, are things possible? Am I the thing that I'm afraid of? Right. So I want to give some counterexamples because I know a lot of people, their fear is the thing that really gets them, right? It's this custom-built thing just for you, and you are uniquely activated by this thought or this line of thinking or this subject, and it gets your anxiety system going. But when we hear somebody else's fear, we can often see the ridiculousness in that. We can hear it being inaccurate. We can hear it being fake or false or whatever verbiage you want to say. So I wanted to present these alternatives, right? Because if the fear is, well, is my fear real, right? Is it possible, right? Or is it possible? Is it real? Am I this? Or is it the reassurance of a therapist saying, well, no, of course you're not gay because you have sexual orientation obsession. Or of course you're not violent because, well, you have harm OCD, right? But hear these and see if they fit, or see if maybe there's something that doesn't feel accurate in them, right? Somebody with contamination obsessions cannot get or spread disease, right? Would we say that? Would we say that someone with health anxiety, they're never going to get sick, they're never going to get cancer, they're never going to get AIDS because that's what they're worried about, right? Would we say someone with hit and run OCD, it means that, they're a perfect driver and they're never going to get into car accidents. They never get into car accidents because that's what they're afraid of, right? Maybe someone with relationship OCD, ROCD, right? Maybe that means that you're actually with the perfect partner and the relationship is indeed perfect, right? It's a great relationship, right? Maybe it's somebody with emetophobia is never going to throw up, right? So if we're saying, if what you've been hearing, Jim, but through some people, is that the fear, and again, I hear both, so I'm trying to address both. Some people say, well, because you have X, it means that you're not that, or that that's not going to happen to you. But we just heard, and again, the opposite is, well, and it's triggering to hear, well, you can have sexual orientation OCD and still discover that you're gay. Right? Or still learn something about yourself, or learn that maybe you're bisexual, or learn that maybe you are not a 1 on the Kinsey scale, or whatever. Is it 7? Is it 0? I forget. Either way, you're on the pole. You're like totally 100% not questioned straight, right? That's what you're about. Whereas I think from that study, they found that a lot of people, most people perhaps, aren't a 1 or a 0. They're like just 1 in, right? So, but with these, we wouldn't say that sounds accurate, right? Because someone has ROCD, well, they actually have a good relationship and there's nothing wrong with their partner at all. Does that sound accurate? Does it sound accurate that someone with health OCD is never going to get sick or is impervious then to the thing that they're afraid of? I'd say it sounds inaccurate. I think so. But again, like what OCD hinges on is the sense of uncertainty. And is the sense of like, I need to know the answers, I need to get to the bottom of it, and I want to know that I'm going to be okay, right? So I'm going to try to go through these relatively quick. So, because what we're talking about is sitting with uncertainty, is sitting with something that feels scary and for some reason activates your anxiety, right? There's a feared story that's involved with it, that's what we're trying to do in exposure to, and sit with this feeling or this sense or this possibility of something bad happening. And, I want to validate scary things are scary. Sad things are sad. We want to be willing to have that sadness and that fear and to say, this is a scary thing. The idea of getting some terrible illness is uncomfortable. The idea of something bad happening to you or something drastically changing in your life and being never able to go back and fix it is sad and is scary and is overwhelming. But can we let it be that without having to force it or control it? So I'm going to read a couple of things, and Jim or anybody else out there, I'd love for you to just notice what comes up for you. Right? What does it feel like when I say these things? Now, these may be triggers for you and maybe triggers for somebody else. But notice what comes up. We're being curious right now about what comes up because, again, that's what we're doing with exposure and response prevention. We're coming up with a stimulus, and I don't care what that stimulus is. This stimulus here is activating your anxiety. This uncomfortable, this neutral thing, this question is making you feel uncomfortable. But maybe you've said 1,000 times to yourself, well, I shouldn't be. This doesn't make any sense. I'm going to prove that I'm not this, or I'm going to prove that this isn't who I am or what I'm about or what's going to happen to me. You go way out of your way for it. So instead, I want to try to sit with it and to not try to fight it and just say, boy, that makes me feel weird, or that makes me feel a certain way, right? And to say, okay, my body and my brain are reacting in a unique way, and I'm going to make space for that reaction. So let me read some things, and I just want you to notice as you're listening to this, what comes up, all right? So the phrase, I might be violent. Now, again, regardless of the subject, notice the thoughts, the feelings, images, and sensations, and mental images. Images, sensations, urges, you get what I'm saying. All right, I might be gay or bisexual. I might get fired from my job. My kids might not like me when they're older. I might not be financially ready for retirement. I might be making the wrong choices in life. I'm going to give you some silly ones as well, because again, these are thoughts, right? It's fill in the blank. What if blank might be true for me? Okay. I might be Cookie Monster. I might be an antelope. Some of those did something to some people. Some of those did nothing for many people. But did you notice that all we're doing is we're just filling in the blank, right? We're just saying, what if blank, right? Or if blank, then blank, right? This is the Mad Libs of OCD, right? And it's saying, all right, I fill in the blank of this, and for whatever reason, I react to it, right? So what we're doing is we're not trying to solve for it. I don't need to try to prove that you're an antelope or not an antelope or Cookie Monster or not Cookie Monster. Is we're saying, you know what? I feel like I'm not Cookie Monster. That seems to be most accurate to who I am. I feel like I am not a Muppet. And, but maybe I am or will be or want to be or should be or could be. Maybe. But if that makes me feel uncomfortable, I need to sit with just that discomfort, because we're relying on that rational part of our brain that says this probably isn't a fact. So, now this is somewhat different than real event OCD, right? We've talked about real event OCD on this podcast before. Real event OCD is an obsession about an event that did in fact happen, right? So I did hit someone with my car, or I was negligent with a knife and hurt my girlfriend in college, or like whatever the story is, right? For some, it's like I got drunk at a party and made out with this person, and did I in fact get their consent, right? But the question, the thing that is not in question is the event. The event happened, right? But then it's all this other stuff, right? It's that fear. Well, what does that mean about me? What will other people think? What will happen about me, or what will happen in life moving forward now, right? What are going to be the consequences that come from this? These are the obsessions that are future-based, and these are the things that need to be held and sat with. The guilt associated with maybe making a mistake or doing something that you didn't want to do, or that's out of character, or that does not fit your values now, that needs to be sat with and met with compassion and understanding, and putting it into a grander context for who you are, who you were, what led to those choices, and an acknowledgement that none of us are perfect and that we make mistakes. But to the story, the content of the obsession, we acknowledge, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I don't need to know. I will find out in life. And sometimes what we find out is nothing happens, right? Okay. So let's talk about then what exposure and response prevention is, right? So with exposure and response prevention, we're progressively getting closer and closer to the thing that we're afraid of, while resisting anything that would neutralize, get rid of, avoid a feeling of anxiety or discomfort or fear, right? We're saying this is uncomfortable and I'm going to feel that feeling, right? Through the process of exposures, we're trying to expose you to the content that raises anxiety. Again, I don't care what the phrase is, or the idea, or the action, or the event, or the place, or the person. It's this thing makes me feel afraid. Through CBT, through the cognitive restructuring piece, we may look at the thing itself and say, is this dangerous? How is this dangerous? What is the what is the likelihood of dangerousness? Or what is, or what's blown out of proportion? What's inaccurate, right? And through all of that, then, we then say, if it's unlikely that the bad thing is going to happen, then we need to progressively get closer and closer to it and learn that that thing is, quote, safe, is okay, right? So we're getting closer and closer to it, and through exposure, we might be using more and more, quote, certain language, but it's not meant to convince you of its truthfulness, right? But it's meant as a way to get to the more like distilled fear, right? So with, for what you're afraid of, Jim, it might be, well, what if I'm gay? Well, shoot, we might just start with just the word gay makes me feel uncomfortable, or bisexual makes me feel uncomfortable. So we're just going to start with that. It doesn't say anything about your sexuality, but it tells you this, it's associated with this story. So we're going to say the word gay over and 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 over again until it's boring. And then we're going to go to maybe the phrase, I could be gay, right? It's getting closer to that fear. We say that over and over again. And then we're going to say, I am gay, or I will be gay, or I am coming out. And then we're going to write coming out stories, or we're going to write really violent stories. And again, it's exposing you to a thing. We've talked about it in terms of like weightlifting and going to the gym, right? I don't care if it's dumbbells or kettlebells or a machine. We're lifting something heavy. So whatever the heavy thing is for you, and it might take different forms, we're lifting heavier, progressively heavier and heavier things until you can lift a lot of things. And maybe it's an emotional state. Maybe it's fear or anxiety or uncertainty or discomfort. Let's lean into that. Let's make space for it, right? So that's what we're doing, right? So an Olympic level exposure, right? What I call graduation level exposures might be saying like, yes, I am gay, I am pedophile, I am trans, and a violent murderer all at once, and I'm going to do it, and it's going to be great, right? It doesn't mean that you are or you're confessing to it. You're saying, I can sit in the fire of this phrase, this concept that makes me feel really uncomfortable, and I can keep living my life. And I can learn that that feeling can be in my body, but I know it will eventually pass. And when I do compulsions, it holds it in. But when I release myself from doing compulsions, it actually lets that feeling pass on its own and let your brain get distracted by other things. And your brain slowly starts to learn, that's just another one of the thoughts. That's just a thought that I can have. It may or may not be me, but it's a thought that I'm having. So let me let that thought come in and leave, period, right? So now, to the therapists out there that say, no, you're not your content. No, because you have violent thoughts, it doesn't mean that you're violent. In fact, it means that you're not violent. It's a very kind, I suppose, and compassionate way to explain it, right? Because it's the biggest fear that you have. It's hard. It would be just freaking mean if you came into my office the first day and was like, hey, Kevin, I'm totally afraid that I'm going to be a murderer. And I'm like, you probably are. Right? That's how terrible would that be, right? So we start slow and we move up to it, right? Folks who have been down the road of ERP for a very long time, they're able to say horrendous things or imagine horrendous things because they've learned that it's a thought or it's a phrase or it's a feeling, right? So we're exposing you and letting go of the solving and the certainty process, right? Remembering that it's about a feeling, not about the thought or the fact, right? So to wrap this up, Jim, my stance is ultimately it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the thought is, right? But getting certainty is ultimately useless, right? It's ultimately useless because we have the capacity to do a great many things. We have the capacity to hurt someone. We have the capacity to learn something new about ourselves, right? We have the capacity to get sick. We have the capacity to spread illness to somebody else, right? It's the possibility that OCD loves, but it's searching for and searching for the definitive answer that's ultimately getting you stuck, right? So to a certain degree, if someone's afraid that they're going to harm somebody, I promise in some points in life you will harm somebody. You will. If you're in a relationship with someone, you're going to do that emotionally. You're going to hurt someone emotionally. Do I know that everybody who comes through my office is in fact the sexuality that they express? I don't, and it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is they're afraid of this thought. And again, if they came in and said, hey, Kevin, I'm afraid that I'm gay, or hey, Kevin, I'm afraid that I'm an antelope, I'm going to say, great, let's embrace the thought about being an antelope, and let's tolerate you grazing on the savannah somewhere until that thought is no longer anxiety-provoking. And then you can have a more rational discussion with yourself about whether or not you actually are an antelope, right? So that's ultimately the point of it. So is it possible that someone is going to hurt somebody? Yeah, it is. Is it possible that you could discover this about yourself? Yeah. Does it mean that it's a fact? Does it mean that just because you are obsessed about it means that it is true? Absolutely not, right? So just because you're obsessed about it doesn't mean it is the opposite of you, but it also doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to happen to you. And getting in a discussion or fighting about that is ultimately losing the point of what exposure and response prevention and what this treatment is all about. It is spending less time obsessing about something that you have already told me is not something that aligns with who you are, and is instead, the point of it is to spend less time in that and more time going and living your life, whatever that looks like, and to whatever degree you believe that to be as accurate and as fulfilling as you believe it to be in this moment in time. What that's going to be like in 5 minutes or 5 years or 50 years from now, I don't know, because we all grow and change, right? So we'll see what happens. But like for today, am I gonna come out? I don't know. I can't say yes. I can't say no, but I can say probably not. But who knows? And we'll have to see. But any effort I have to force that thought out of my head is only solidifying my relationship with that thought. So, Jim, what I would encourage you to do is go and live your life and to spend less time in the debate about whether or not it is or is not true, because we don't know, and it doesn't matter. So, all right, Jim, I hope this was helpful. I know it kind of went all over the place. I went a little bit more theoretical, a little bit more out there than normal, but thank you so much for sending in this question. I know this question is something that people wrestle with a lot, so hopefully this was meaningful. But until next time, everybody, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.